be starting in just a minute. Welcome everybody on behalf of Holocaust Museum, Los Angeles. My name is Michael Morgenstern and I'm an educator at the museum. This morning, I'm pleased to welcome you to our discussion with Martha Sternbach, a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. For those of you who have not been to the museum before, Holocaust Museum Los Angeles is the first Holocaust survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. Also, for those of you who don't know, we just officially changed our name 2 weeks ago or so from Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust to Holocaust Museum Los Angeles. And we invite you to visit our new website at holocaustmuseumla.org. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust, and this memorial eventually became Holocaust Museum Los Angeles. These survivors who established our museum did so to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Furthermore, they mandated that our museum should always be free to the public, making Holocaust education accessible to everyone. Even though we are not able to be in our museum's physical space for the time being, we are still able to carry forward this mission. This morning, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Martha Sternbach, who will share her story with you. After Martha shares her story, you can type in questions and she'll answer as many as possible. Just before we started working from home at the end of March, Martha was speaking frequently at our museum to students in all sorts of groups, and she has been such an integral part of our museum for the last couple of years, and we're so honored and grateful to have you here this morning. Martha, you may start sharing your story now, and thank you again so much for being with us this morning.
Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Well, I was born in 1926 in a small town where my father was born. And my mom came from a city, it wasn't too far. Whenever I wanted to visit my grandma, I would ride my bicycle. It took about an hour with the bicycle. And I had a sister, Lillian, she was 2 years older, and a brother, Ernie, she was 2 years younger. And we didn't have a public school. I went to a Catholic school. And everybody got along. We never had any problem. We respected one another. And we know everybody in town and everybody knew us because my father had a store and everybody shopped in our store. And you know, we heard a lot of rumors what was going on in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Sometimes people escaped from those countries and told us terrible things was going on. They came to Hungary because we felt safe in Hungary. But unfortunately, things started to change. The first change came in 1942. There was a new rule: if a Jewish person wanted to buy a home or any other property, they could only buy it if nobody else wanted it. And my father wanted to enlarge the store, and there was a house for sale. So he went to the mayor's office and he asked the mayor if he could buy that home. The mayor said no problem, and he asked my father for a certain amount of money. And you know, in a small town, we had the store in the front and our living quarters in the back. And we moved into the home, but we didn't even live there for a year when we got this registered letter that we have to move out because someone was at home. That was our first experience prejudiced against us. And things was still quiet, you know. We never had any problem. You know, Jewish men go to the synagogue on Friday night. And one Friday night, when my father came home from the synagogue, he said there were two young men escaped from Poland and they were saying terrible things that people had to dig their own grave. You know, we didn't have television those days and the newspaper didn't print anything, so we didn't know anything. And in 1943, my father was called into the army. You know, my father was a medic in World War I. My father was in this country, came to America in 1910. He went to medical school in New York. He had two older married sisters and an older married brother. But when they find out that my grandma was sick, my father went home for a visit and he couldn't come back anymore because World War I broke out in 1914. So he had to go into the army. So when he was called into the army in 1943, he was in uniform. But after 6 months, they sent him home. He was considered too old. He was 52 that time because all the young men were called in, all the Jewish young men, for slave labor. They were slaves to the Hungarian army. They did all kind of work, building road and all kind of work. But like I said, in my hometown, we never had any problem. And the next thing came in 1944, April. All the Jewish people had to wear a yellow star. I remember the first time I went out with the yellow star, I went to visit a friend. She fell and she had a cast on her legs. And while I was visiting her, her mother made a remark. She said, I don't know how we're going to run with Amy with a cast on her legs. I couldn't understand why she said that. When I went back home, I asked my parents, why would she say something like that? They didn't know. And you know, we have our holiday Passover usually in April, sometimes the same time as Easter, and we celebrate for 8 days. The first 2 days, we don't travel, the men go to the synagogue. And every year we would hire a carriage and go to visit my grandma, and all the other relatives would come. Like here you go on Thanksgiving and Christmas time, and we would talk about it. And I asked my parents if we're going to go this year. They told me we're not going this year. I cannot explain this to you, but I told them, but I want to go to visit my grandma. I'm going to go with the bicycle. Not only my grandma lived in the city, but I had a cousin. She had 4 little children. Her husband was a rabbi and he was already taken away. And I went with the bicycle. Just before the city, there was a highway and I had to stop. The first time I saw a convoy of Nazis with motorcycles and jeeps. And when the convoy passed by, I continued. And that was the last time I saw my grandma and my cousin with the children. And you know, we finished our holiday. I don't know if anybody knows, we don't eat bread for 8 days. We commemorate the time when Moses took the children out of Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt. So we don't eat bread for 8 days. And right after the holiday, we got a messenger from the mayor's office that by nightfall, we all have to be, all the Jewish families have to be in the synagogue. We could each carry, but not too much. We had 16 families in town. And you know, when the young men were taken away, my mom made sure that their wife and children have everything that they needed. And this time too, she said, I'm going to go to Mrs. Fried. She has all those young children. I want to make sure those children have enough clothes and shoes. I remember my sister and I told that, Mom, you know, we have to get ready. So she said, you know, girls, what to take, comfortable shoes and clothes. And she went into the store and she filled up a basket with clothes and shoes for those children. So by nightfall, we were all in the synagogue. And, you know, my mom had on a gold watch and a ring. And, you know, when the war started, they said that money is not going to worth too much. So a lot of people bought gold. But my father believed in this country and he bought dollars. So he took away the gold watch and the ring from my mom and the dollars, and he put it into one of those hanging chandeliers in the synagogue. And he told each of us, if any of you come back, you know where those valuable things are. So we spent the night in our synagogue. And the next morning, carriages came to take us away. And there was a young clergyman in town. He was a Protestant. Usually they married. He was not married. And he was a very good friend of my parents. He came that morning and shook hands with all of us and wished us good luck. And now the carriages took us to the train station, and the train took us to the city where the ghetto was. You know where the ghetto is, just a couple of streets where all the Jewish people stayed. So 5 of my family members, we were put into this 1-bedroom apartment owned by the young couple. The young couple, her parents with a sister, and another couple with a son. Of course, we didn't have a bed to sleep and just slept on the floor. And the only thing we did, we had a community kitchen, and we went to help when you see young women with little children. So we tried to help. Everybody helped one another. And after 2 weeks, they were making the ghetto smaller. This time we slept in an attic on some straw. Well, it wasn't easy to sleep because it was very close to the train station and the train was whistling all night. And after 2 weeks, they told us we're going to leave the ghetto. This time they put us into cattle wagons. I don't know how many of us, you couldn't sit down, you just stand next to each other. And they gave us a bucket to use as a bathroom. And after a couple of hours, people just collapsed on one another. Children were crying. And the train had to stop every once in a while to empty those buckets. I can't remember how long we were going. When finally the train stopped, the doors opened up. It was still very early in the morning. It was very dark outside. All we saw this young men in striped uniform. They called them capos. And they were yelling in German, everybody out fast, schnell heraus. And they separated the men from the women. You know, they were rushing us, so we didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to my father and my brother. My sister and I was holding on to my mom. And this couple asked my mom in German how old she was. You know, the second language was German in Hungary, and my mom spoke very good German. My mom was only 42, and she said 52. I have no idea why. As soon as she said that, he pushed her to the left, and before we even asked what's going on, he said, don't worry, you're going to see her later. Now, we were in Poland now, and the concentration camp called Auschwitz. But they were rushing us to go in further. As it was getting lighter, you could make out those very high wire fences, and behind it, wooden barracks with brick chimneys. And as we were going further, the area called Birkenau, we came to a very large building, and there were 2 girls. One was older, her name was Miri. They called her the Blockälteste. The young girl, her name was Gerdi. She was about my age. They told us to go into the building, and then we were inside. They told us we have to take all our clothes off. There were hooks on the wall. Just hold on to our shoes, and we had to stay in line. And I looked ahead, and I saw these couples again. They were shaving off the girls' hair and wherever else you had hair. I couldn't understand. I thought maybe they were dirty. There, they shaved all our hair off, and when everybody was done, we went outside. And just before we went into the next building, in front of the building, there was a very large cement container, this white liquid. And I heard them yelling something I couldn't understand. So Gerdi hit me with a strap, and she pushed my hand down where I was holding my shoes. This was to disinfect your shoe in that white liquid. And then we went inside the shower room. There were shower heads on the ceiling. I could tell you up until then, we were together with families. No matter how difficult things were, we never complained. But I still remember when that cold water was coming down on my face, my tears were falling because I couldn't understand why this was happening. This was like the first nightmare. And when they stopped the water, we didn't have anything to wipe ourselves with. And they looked at one another. You hardly recognize your own sister without the hair. Then we went into another room. They told us, put your shoes on, and there were dresses on a table, and they told us, take a dress. No one, they were just a dress to put it on, but they were always rushing us. You couldn't see if the dress fit you or didn't fit you. You had to do it very fast. And when everybody was dressed, then they took us into the area where I saw those wooden barracks. They put us into this barrack 18. We went inside, you saw this wooden bed, 3 layers, no cushion or cover. I can't remember exactly, it was 10 or 12 girls on each layer. And from my hometown, there were 6 other girls. They were all 6 together, 2 girls my age and 2 girls about 10 years older. So we were always trying to stay together because every morning we had to go outside. They were counting us. They called that Zählappell. First Miri counted us and the SS came to count us. And in the morning they would give us a little black coffee with a piece of bread. And lunchtime again, we had to go outside. And lunchtime they gave us some soup, 1 round dish, no spoon. You just had to drink from that and pass it around. But the air had such a terrible odor, so many of us felt nauseous. So in the beginning, when we weren't that hungry, we just couldn't eat that soup. But I'm going to tell you later on, we were so hungry, we couldn't worry about the smell or the taste. We just had to eat whatever they gave us. And at night again, we had to go outside. They counted us again. And if somebody was missing, they stayed in the barracks or in the bathroom. We had to stay outside until everybody was fine and counted. And this was going on when we came to Auschwitz-Birkenau. It was in the beginning of June. And then there was selections. I don't know if you heard of Dr. Mengele. He came select girls for work. And every time they selected the girls, you know, next door to us, I forgot to tell you, they called the Lager. You know, they gave us hope because they say all their women in nice clothes and very young children. And they gave us hope that families stayed together. But one night we heard a lot of crying and screaming. And the next morning, that whole area was empty. They called it the Lager. So whenever Mengele chose the girls to work, they put them into the Lager and they put numbers on the arms. I was separated many times from my sister. She was as healthy as I was, but she was always very thin. But while we were still in the sea lager, you know, you could manage, you could change places with one another. So we managed to stay together. It was already getting cold. It was the beginning of October. And every time we were separated with my sister, when we got back together, she would tell me, if one day we can get back together, if it's possible for me to go with our friend from my hometown. And we were still together with our friends, and they told us we're going to leave the sea lager. And they told us, took us away, and we were hoping wherever they take us, we're going to stay together. But again, we had to get undressed, and that's the day they were selecting girls. And you know, if the girls were thin, when we got to Auschwitz, this time they were even thinner. And there was a little booth, and the girls that were not selected for work, they pushed them into those little booths. And when I saw them pushing my sister in there, I ran to Miri and I said to Miri, you know, I really want to be with my sister. Can I go with her, or she could go with me? And she looked at me and she said to me, you know, you're not being fair. She's so thin, they're going to take her someplace where there is going to be more food, so she should gain weight. I wish I could explain this. I was so naive or just plain stupid that I believed her. And I'm going to tell you honestly, while we were in Auschwitz-Birkenau, I had no idea there was a gas chamber in the crematorium. I believe what Miri told me. And this time they gave me wooden shoes, a dress, and even a coat. And I was standing outside with a group of girls, and my friend from my hometown was in a different group. You know, I could have changed places with somebody, could go with them. I cannot explain why I didn't. Only after the war, I find that only 2 survived from that group. You know, it was interesting. While we were staying outside, I don't know if anybody ever seen something, you look at it and you tell yourself, I don't believe what I'm seeing. There was an open truck with bruised, naked bodies passing by. I looked at it and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And as we were standing there, Then we saw a group of older women and very young children dressed up very nice. The sisters recognized their aunt from Budapest. They were calling her name and she was looking around very confused. You know, we thought maybe they lived there. Later we find out that was the less transport from Budapest, and they were taking them right straight to the gas chamber in the crematorium. And then they took us to the train station. They gave us a little package of crackers and cheese, but we didn't go too far. Then we got off from the train. There were 3 civilian men. They owned the factory. They looked us over and they okayed for us to go to work in a factory. So we got back in the train again, and this time they took us into Germany. I don't know how long the train was going. Then it stopped. They told us this town called Altenburg, and that's where the ammunition factory was. And every morning, this older German soldiers, sometimes women in uniform, they would take us to work in the factory because they considered me between the young ones. And 1944 November, I became 18. So I didn't work on a very heavy machine, just standing by a table all day. They gave me like a wooden tray with round black metal pieces. I had no idea what it was. You had to examine it. If it was damaged, you had to take it out from the train. And watching us work, if I'm going to say an old German lady, you know, I guess when you're 18, even 50 seems old. But I want to remember her because she was very, very kind to us. At Christmas time, she bought a little apple for us. And there was a very pretty young lady also watch us work. And she would always whisper to us that her brother's in the army, and he wrote that the war is going to be over soon and we're going to be all right. You know, during the night, you could hear a lot of noises, planes go by and all kind of noises. And now it was already 1945 April. They told us we're going to leave the factory. It was very interesting. As we started to march, we had a couple of these older German soldiers and a couple of women in uniform. And the men had little white flag in their hands, and the women put this white kerchief on their head. We have no idea why. But on the road, it was such a chaos, you know, German people running from all sides. Some had a little bundle, some had a suitcase, some was pulling a little carriage. We had no idea what was going on. I don't know how long we were going. Then they told us we're going to stop in this town. This town was called Waldenburg. They told us there is a lot of shooting going around, and we don't want to be hit by a bullet. So they showed us the hills to go up there and just lay down flat. And we went on, got on the hills and we lay down flat. All of a sudden, I saw this young German soldier with a machine gun. For a minute, I thought maybe he came to kill us. After we find out that the liberators were coming, so he was just trying to run away hide. You know, it was very difficult for me. I missed my sister. It was very emotional time. And as we were laying there during the night, you know, you talk to all the other girls, and we were all from the same region. Most of them know my family because my uncle was the chief rabbi. So I got friendly with these 4 sisters and another girl from their hometown. They were much older than I was. I guess they felt sorry for me. They took me like the 6 sisters, you know. And we spent the night in those hills. And the next day when we came down, it was 1945, April the 13th, on a Saturday. There was a highway and we saw this Jeep coming and it stopped. It was a British soldier. He was trying to find out who we were. You know, we didn't speak English. We were so hungry and thirsty. He had a lot of boxes in the Jeep. First, it looked like he's going to open the box, but he just got back in the Jeep and left. So now we were so hungry and thirsty. So the 6 of us girls decided to go into town to find something to eat. As we were walking in town, there was a little house and the window opened up. And this lady asked us to come in. We all understood a little German. She looked at us and she said, I know you must be hungry. I have some food for you. And she showed us the bathroom to wash up. You know, the Germans, the Nazis, while we were in Auschwitz-Birkenau, used to call us lazy Jews. We were very clean when we came to Auschwitz-Birkenau. But unfortunately, in the end, we were full of lies because we just had that one dress, we could never wash it. So we just washed our hands, and she gave us something to eat. And she told us that her husband and her son is in the army. And she said, you know, I have a room for you. My son's room, you're welcome to stay here. Well, we really didn't have anywhere else to go, so we accepted and we spent the night. But in the morning, we decided not to impose on her any longer. So we just packed her and we left. You know, I never forgot that lady and the other two, how important it was that they were kind to us, and just you could learn from that how important this to, no matter what the situation, that if you're nice to people, if you make them feel better. And God bless the American army. Then they came and they were wonderful. You know, there was an empty office building and they set up a kitchen downstairs and they brought us some cuts to sleep on. But we were very anxious to go back to Hungary. But they told us the war is not over yet. We cannot go anywhere. One day there were two ladies from the Red Cross came and they are asking our ages. I mentioned before I was considered between the young ones. I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 of us. They took us away to a different camp and they explained to us if any of us wanted to go to any of the Scandinavian countries, families would adopt us and we would have a very good life. Nobody was interested. I believed that my family must be back home, so I wouldn't go anywhere. Anyway, we still waited until end of May when they told us the war is over and we could try to go back to Hungary. Every time we went down to the train station, get a passenger train, the Russians were looting Germany. You all see these open wagons with all kind of things shipping it to Russia. And finally, the first passenger train we got on, it didn't go too far. There was a very famous place called Carlsbad. It was a resort place. There was a couple of ladies and they took us up to this beautiful building like a hotel. And the first time we took a shower and we slept in the bed. He told us we could stay as long as we want. We just stayed one night. We were so anxious to go back to Hungary. Finally, again, we find the passenger train. I can't remember how long it took when we arrived in Hungary. There was a lot of young men. Most of them were survivors of the Holocaust. I was talking to this one young man. He was asking my name and where I was from. And, you know, my mom had an older sister that lived in Budapest. So he said, you know, your aunt and your uncle, and I had two cousins. One was my age and one was 2 years younger. They all back in their own apartment. He said, you could go to see them tomorrow. They took us to a building. They gave us dinner that night. We stayed over one night. And the next morning, I got up very early. You know, I know where my aunt lived. You know, in the summertime, my cousin would come to spend the summer with us. And Christmas time, when we didn't have school, we used to go to Budapest. It was a beautiful city. Actually, Buda and Pest is two cities, and the famous chain bridge that connect the two cities. So my aunt lived in Pest, and it wasn't far where I was staying. So I got up very early this next morning and I came to the apartment. I rang the bell. Then my aunt opened the door. She looked at me. She said, you look familiar, but I have no idea who you are. She hardly recognized me. And that's when I find out what happened to everybody. Because the Russians liberated Auschwitz in January 1945. And General Eisenhower discovered with the army all those death camps. So they already know what happened, but I had no idea. And I could tell you, no matter how much I cried, nothing changed. You know, it was very difficult. The Russians liberated but occupied the country and they didn't behave really. And I said to my aunt and uncle, I really don't want to stay in the country anymore. But my aunt Miriam came with me to my hometown. You know, they told me that the mayor ran away and this young man was liberated by the Russians. His name is Freddy Schwartz. He became the mayor. So my aunt and I went to visit him. And I told him about my mom's watch. And he said, maybe somebody find it. He's going to ask people. He said, whatever he find in their homes, there's a room if I recognize something that belonged to us. I remember going into the room and I recognized these two silver candle holders. This was my mom's, and he gave me that. And we went back to Budapest. And 2 weeks later, he came to Budapest. He had my mom's watch. You know, it was very interesting. You know, my uncle and aunt had to sell their valuables because nobody had a job. And if you needed a piece of bread, you had to stand in line by the bakery. So I gave the watch to my uncle to sell because I wanted to leave the country. I wanted to get some clothes. But when they came back to Budapest, I wore my cousin's clothes. My aunt used to tell me, I don't know where you're going to go or settle. Just remember the kind of a family you came from. I was kind of sarcastic. I said to her, I guess Hitler didn't respect our families. You know, nobody talked about how much money somebody had, how rich you were, only the kind of a family you came from. You know, my mom was the youngest of 8 children. My grandfather was a rabbi, but he must have died young because even my mom didn't remember her father. So everybody knows my uncle was a chief rabbi. So that's the way you know what kind of a family you came from. And I told my aunt, I want to leave the country as soon as possible. There were organizations to arrange that. And then I heard of these little children, they were saved in an orphanage. And I went to meet them. They were between 5 and 6 years old. There was a young woman with a little daughter with them. You know, those little children didn't even remember their parents. And when they cried, you give them a hug. So I told them, I'm going to leave with those children. And, you know, and the day came that we were getting to leave. You know, we were on the train and Hungary was called the Russian zone. And just before the train went up to the American zone, these Russian soldiers came up on the train and they were looking what everybody was carrying. And they looked in my knapsack, they saw the 2 silver candle holders, they took everything. But I'm going to tell you, nothing meant anything. Thing didn't mean a thing. Everything that was important before wasn't important anymore. The only thing was important to me that the children needed me, and that was very important. So the first stop in the American zone was Vienna, but we didn't stay there too long. They took us into Germany, what they call the DP camp, you know, they call displaced persons camp. A lot of our survivors were in there, there was a lot of these DP camps. The one we stayed called Leipheim. We had housing, you know, I know the American Red Cross and this other organization that hires and the joint took care of everything. We had a community kitchen and we had housing and we were teaching the children to write and read. And one day the children put on a little show. We had a little stage, and as we were watching the children perform, in front of me a girl turned around. One of the sisters that I became friends, her name was Hannah. Seeing her like finding your own sister, you know. She said to me, we went to Budapest to look for you, and your aunt and uncle said, Martha is someplace in Germany, maybe you're going to find her. So she was telling me, you know, when we went back to Hungary, I stayed in Budapest and they went back to their own hometown. I didn't think I ever going to see them again. So she was telling me that one of the sisters, Vienna, she got married, she stayed in Hungary. She said, my sister Goldie is here. She also married a young man that his wife and children were killed. They were there. And Esther, she was there a little bit older than I was, the youngest. And Goldie, yes, she married a neighbor, a young man that lost his wife and children. And Hannah also met a young man that his wife and children were killed in Auschwitz, and she married in that camp lifetime. There was a lot of marriages, you know. Young people were lonely. I remember this young man asked me to go for a walk, you know. I said no, because I always remembered when we were teenagers, my sister and I, my mom always told us, always dress like a lady and be a lady because your reputation will follow you for the rest of your life. So I really didn't want to do anything. I had no one to watch over me, so I know I had to be good. And, you know, we were all wanted to come. We had relatives in this country, but it was a long waiting list, you know. By this time, Goldie had a little baby boy and Hannah had a little baby girl. There was a lot of children born in the camp, you know. And I remember there was a couple that had a little boy, the same as Gordie's little boy. They already had papers to come to this country, but that little boy didn't develop the right way. He couldn't sit up or smile. And they were not allowed to bring that baby. They had to leave the baby in an institution in Germany. So when I saw that, you know, it really scared me. And one day we heard an announcement, if any of us wanted to go to Canada, families would sponsor us. So Esther and I signed up for that. You know, we just wanted to get out from Europe. You know, we considered the whole Europe that one big cemetery. So Esther and I signed up for that to go to Canada. And, you know, we were on the ship to Canada and you meet a lot of people, you know. And once I was walking around, I see this young man, I had on a suit and this young man had on a suit from the same fabric. Well, so he was standing next to us and he's next to me. He said, you know, we look like husband and wife. I said, no, we look like sister and brother. You know, he was telling me that his mother and his sister was killed in Auschwitz. And he said, you know, my father remarried. So one day I met his father and his stepmother. And as I was talking to his stepmother and told her where I was from, he said, do you know that I was in your hometown? I stayed in your home. My brother was a teacher in your town. Well, I really didn't remember her or her brother, but I did remember everybody's always talk about his name was Frommer. He had a good voice and Frommer left town and he became a famous cantor. That's how I remembered who her brother was. And now this young man kept on following me around. You know, I was very uncomfortable. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. So I said to him, you know, I'm really sorry, but, you know, I have relatives in New York and there is a young man waiting for me there. Actually, I didn't even know that was true. And so we arrived in Toronto and I stayed with this family, very nice family. Their name was Feinberg. I still remember the address was Realmar Garden in the suburb of Toronto. I had two little boys and I helped with the two little boys during the day and I went to school at night. And I wrote to my relatives in New York that where I was. And so my uncle wrote to this family, please let me come to New York to be with relatives. Everybody was saying to me, you're not going to like New York. Canada is so much nicer. But Canada was very nice, but you know, most the teenagers went to New York. I don't know how long it took. Finally, I went to New York and I stayed with my Aunt Frida, my father's older sister. She had two married daughter, a married son, and she had grandchildren. And I find a job not too far. You know, this European girl owned a shop. She made children's clothes, and most of the girls were refugees from Europe. So then the day I worked, and at night I went to school. So one day my Aunt Frida said, you know, I have a niece, Ellie, and her husband, Morris. They would like to meet you. So people visited either Sunday or at night. They didn't live far from my aunt. So we went over one night to visit. And, you know, I would tell you, all my cousins spoke Hungarian because when my aunt came to this country, they had little children. They really didn't speak the language. So I had no problem communicating with them. And Ellie and Morris also spoke Hungarian. And then a young man came in. His name was Sidney, Morris's single brother. And we spent a couple of hours. And just before we left, Sidney asked me for my telephone number. Well, I didn't have my own telephone, so I said to him, you know, your sister-in-law, Ellie, has my Aunt Frida's telephone number. But after we left, my Aunt Frida said, you know, it didn't seem very nice the way you said that. So I told my Aunt Frida, you know, I'm really not interested. I never dated and I had my own plan. I thought I'm going to work hard, save up money and get my own place. So I really wasn't interested. But after a couple of days, Sydney called me up and asked me out for a date. So I said to him, you know, I have school that night. So he said, well, what is more important? Well, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. So I said, okay. You know, when we met and he was talking about his family, he was the youngest of 5. He has 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. You know, it felt so familiar. So we dated for a while and he told me he wants to marry me. But I was so scared to even show my feeling. And I said to him, don't tell anybody anything. Just let's take our time, get to know each other a little bit more. But by the time I went back to my Aunt Frida's house, everybody knew that I'm going to marry him. Anyway, we got married in 1950, December the 3rd. And a year after, 1951, September the 16th, I had a son, Harvey. And in 1954, I had a daughter, Karen. And in 1955, June, 11 months after, I had a daughter, Linda. And we lived in New York, and I was always very protective of my children, So when my children were young, they went to a private school, what you call a parochial school, we called a yeshiva. And when my son was 12 years old, we had a 2-bedroom apartment in New York. We needed a bigger place. So we bought a house in New Jersey, Teaneck, New Jersey, not too far from the George Washington Bridge. And my daughter Karen Linda said, Mom, we never had friends in the neighborhood. Can't we go to public school? The schools were very good in Teaneck. So Karen Linda went to public school, but Harvey stayed in yeshiva. He graduated from Yeshiva University High School. Then he went to NYU College, and he wanted to go to medical schools. He went to Rutgers, it's the state medical school. And when he wanted to do internship, he came here to California, to UCLA. He became a psychiatrist and a pharmacologist. And Karen also went to a state college, Douglas, a girls' college, and she wanted to be an audiologist. She got her master's degree from Columbia University. And Linda, she was a very good student. She skipped 1 year high school. She never applied for college, but they believed there was a university, Fairleigh Dickinson University, and she enrolled in there. Then she met this nice young man, Stephen, and they fell in love. Linda got married when she was 18 in 1973. The most wonderful thing happened in 1974, September the 20th, I had a granddaughter. I saw this shirt in a souvenir shop. It said, if I would have known grandchildren are so much fun, I would have had them first. Well, my son Harvey came here and met this nice young lady, Laura, and she married in 1980, in January. And Karen also met this nice young man, David, from another town, and she also married in 1980 in October. And Karen has 2 sons. I just had 2 great grandsons. One is 8 months old and one is 5 weeks old. And I'm very thankful for this country, that my children have a good life here. And we have to really appreciate everything. There's no other country in the world. We come here from all over the world to live in peace and raise our children in peace. And we just pray and hope that it stays this way. And we really have to appreciate it and be thankful to be in this country. Any questions?
Martha, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We do have some questions. Before we go to questions, I wanted to quickly show the audience one of your family photos that I have here, that I just had. In the meantime, well, before we do that, we'll start with a question. How difficult was it to tell your children about your experiences when they were growing up?
I never talked about it until 1994. Someone called me that Yale University gave a grant to this Ramapo College to take testimonies from Holocaust survivors. That was the first time I talked about it. It was a very detailed 2-hour tape. Most of it I cried to it. That was the first time that they found out about it, because they were already grown up. So I thought I wanted them to know.
Thank you, Martha. Before we go into some more questions, I wanted to share this photo with the audience. Martha, can you please explain when this photo was taken? And I will point you out and your
I
mother
would
out as
think
well.
that must have been 1936, I would think. I maybe was about 10 years old. My cousin was getting married, and so we were all together.
And Martha,
That's
this
me.
is
That's
you,
me.
right?
Yeah,
And
that's
this
me.
is
Yeah.
your sister?
That's a cousin. That's a cousin that she's still alive. She lived in Brooklyn, New York. And that's my brother. And the other cousin, she's still alive. She lived in Israel, and that was my sister that was killed in Auschwitz. And
And this
behind my
is your
sister, it's my mom. That was my mom.
this also just reminds me that I see behind you, you have so many family photos
Yes,
on your
yes.
wall. And I think that actually really sums up a lot of what you talk about. I know previously seeing you in person at the museum, you always had your family photos on you and in your home.
Yes.
We have some more questions. What advice do you have for people during these difficult times?
Well, you know, never give up hope, and you have to be a very responsible person. You know, we all have choices to make. And sometimes I wonder when I see young people with guns, you know, the parents have to teach you. That's my most important thing, you know. But I was fortunate enough to have that kind of a parents. They always explain to us and how important it is to be a responsible person, no matter how old you are. And children, you're lucky to be in this country. You gotta have to get a good education, and you have choices to make. You know, sometimes people listen to their friends. You know, there is too many temptations when you're a young child, so you have to be very careful with your choices.
This is a similar question, but what has helped you heal over the years from your trauma?
You know, I never liked people to feel sorry for me. And then I met my husband, and she had her whole family, you know. And then I had my children, you know, they were the most precious thing. And it's important for us to name after my mother and father, my children named after them. So, you know, that was so important. I remember that my children had friends come over to the house. They couldn't understand why I do things for my children, because all I wanted them to study, you know, I did everything. They never had chores to do. And I know how important it is for us to get a good education, because I used to tell my children, that's the only thing that can take away from you.
And when you started speaking about your experiences for the first time, have you noticed if it's has that changed over time? You know, for the last, let's say, 20 or so years, how has the way that you shared your story and the way you feel comfortable doing so, how has that changed over time?
Well, of course, it means a lot that my children all very good to me, and they have good professions, and I feel secure. So that meant a lot. And I wanted the children to know, no matter where you are, no matter what you wear, you always the same person. When the Nazis called me Nazi Jew, I know I was better than they were. I was still the same person, no matter where I was. It's important to remember. And parents, give your children confidence and love them, so they feel secure.
And that actually leads to another question that one of our members of the audience asked. What advice would you give to parents to help raise children who are kind and compassionate, similar to some of the people who had helped you over the years?
Well, I always mention you have to be really responsible whatever you do. And parents have to teach their children right from wrong, and not, you know, their children bully each other, and just ignore that, you know. And you have your whatever you want to accomplish, you could accomplish, but you have to study and you want to benefit by. Sometimes children think that they study for the children, for the teacher or the parents. No, the children will benefit by when they study and accomplish everything they want.
When did you decide to move to Los Angeles, and what prompted you to do that?
To move where? I can understand.
Sorry, to move to Los Angeles.
You know, after my husband passed away 4 years ago, you know, my children decided the winters are difficult, you know, when it's cold weather. So I gave him my son came here first, and then my granddaughter. My granddaughter, Tara Sector, she does cartoon voices and audio books and voiceover. And I'm very proud of all my grandchildren. One of my grandsons worked for CNN, lived in Atlanta, and the younger grandson, Alex, he works for a fertility doctors. They're very good at the computer, you know, it helped a lot. They got good jobs.
Martha, this is a question from me, but can you share with everyone what you did for your 90th birthday a couple years ago? This was about 4 years ago, I think.
Well, you know, my children asked me what I wanted to do for my 90th birthday. I told them I wanted to go to Disneyland, you know, because everybody's so happy there. I told them I want to see everybody happy. So my granddaughter wrote to them, and they gave us a private tour guide, and all my children and grandchildren came, and this was the wonderful day to spend, you know, to see everybody happy. And that's what I'm praying and hoping for. One day, the whole world will realize how nice it is to get along with everybody, you know, to live in peace. I don't understand war. Nobody learned from the past. There is no winner in a war. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And I still don't give up hope that one day everybody all over the world could live in peace with each other. That's why my wish.
Thank you, Martha. I remember that was one of the first things I learned about you when I met you. Have you ever been back to Hungary since you came to the United States?
No, I wouldn't go back anywhere. We went to Auschwitz with my husband with an Israeli tour. That was important for me. You know, when the Jewish person dies, they call you sit shiva for 8 days. We never did that, but everybody in the crematorium, you know, in Auschwitz-Birkenau, we had a rabbi with us, and I said, you know, I never said shiva, and you have to cut your clothes. And I sat there for a half an hour, and that was important for me. It was an emotional, you know, special that there's an eternal light and the prayer for the dead constantly. That was an emotional, but it was a very important trip for me.
How many times have you been to Israel?
I was 3 times in Israel. And that was very important because you feel that if people have to run from any other country, there's a place where to go.
When did your husband come to the United States, and where was he born?
He was born in Romania, you know, where Elie Wiesel, and first his father came, then the 2 older brother came, then he came, and then he was 16 years old when he came to this country. And then his mother and the sister came, and one of his sisters were married. One of his sisters, she went to Auschwitz. She had a little daughter that was killed in Auschwitz. She then had number in her arms, you know, so they understand, you know, that was so important that I know my children have at least one set of grandparents and uncles and aunts.
And how do you feel about people? We have a couple of questions. People would like to know how you feel overall about you know, the fact that you went through the Holocaust and are now living in the United States. You raised great family. You've had you had a really long marriage. How do you overall, is there a way you would like to sum up your life?
You know, I'm going to tell you what was very important. I never lost faith in God. I'm going to tell you a little story. I don't know how old I was. I was visiting my friend, and the neighbor, an old couple, had this big apple tree, and one of the branches was on her side. And you know, when you're young, you want some green apples. But the tree must have moved, and the old couple saw it, and they yelled, and I ran home. I was very scared. And my mom asked what happened. I had to be honest and told her, but I said to her, but the people didn't see me. It would have been embarrassment. You know, they shocked in our store that I steal that apple. So my mom said, you better sit down and listen what I'm going to tell you. Maybe the people didn't see you, but God sees everything that you do. And I still believe that. And then you believe that, then you know you're going to think before you do anything that you know it's not right. And I know when somebody passes away, their soul goes to heaven with God. And I believe that. So that gives me peace of mind.
Thank you for sharing that. What is your maiden name? And on that subject, what can you please share with us your parents' names? That you mentioned your siblings' names earlier, but the names
Yes,
of your immediate family as well as your maiden
yes.
name.
My maiden name is Fendrich. Fendrich. And my father was Hugo Fendrich. And my mom was, and her maiden name was Bilitzer. You know, I always think that I'm maybe related to Ward Blitzer, you know, because original, I think her grandparents came from Poland.
Thank you for sharing. We have time for a few more questions for those listening in the audience. In the meantime, Martha, I have another question for you. Since we are approaching Rosh Hashanah, can you share with us your memories of celebrating Rosh Hashanah with your family in Hungary?
Of course, holidays were very important. You know, the men went to the synagogue, and also, you know, Rosh Hashanah, certain holidays, you know, the new moon, they called Rosh Chodesh, you know, the women went to the synagogue. And we had friends, and it was wonderful. You know, especially the nicest memories I have when we have Hanukkah, when we have Christmas, because my father would bring in toys, and all the children were so happy. And we would have friends coming over, you know, and you had all the food, and it was just felt so good. You felt so happy and safe with your family, you know. And I have wonderful memories, and I want to remember that.
You are so fortunate to have so many memories of your family, and I think it's important to remember them before this tragedy. Can you share with everybody, please? You mentioned to me earlier this morning the memory you had about your younger brother. Can you please share that with everyone?
Yes, you know, the young men, you know, had to go away to study when they become 13 to bar mitzvah, to go to a yeshiva. And he was very attached to my mom. And he said, my mom, he looks so young, much younger than his age. He said, do I have to go away? Can you just get a teacher for me? So my mom said, you have to go. You meet children your age, boys your age, and you have to go to become a mensch. And so he didn't go too far because he stayed with my grandmother. And every time before he wanted to come home for the weekend, he would send a postcard. He loved certain chocolate cake that my mom used to bake for him. So he would send a postcard that he'll be home for the weekend. And then my father in 1943, he was called into the army. All of a sudden, my brother came back Friday afternoon without telling the postcard that he comes. And my mom said, how come you come home? He said, well, you know, my father went into the army and I came home. So my mom said, don't you remember? They called him Tatala. But we talked about that you went away to yeshiva to be a mensch. So he said to my mom, but I am already a mensch. When I washed my mom's face, she was so proud. And she said, you know, you're right, you are a mensch. I never forget that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We have a few more questions. Have you ever written a memoir?
No, because when I made that tape in 1994, that's a very detailed, I wanted my children to know. And I know a lot of people write books, but I want to make sure that I'm saying what I experienced,
Thank you for sharing that. We have a lot of questions, or people here who are just thanking you so much for sharing your story. And just to clarify, you came to Los Angeles only for the last, you only lived here for the last 4 years.
For you.
Before that, and when you were living in New Jersey, where would you share your story generally? Would you go to schools?
Never talked about it. We lived in Jersey, in Teaneck for 19 years. We never talked about it. Among all survivors, we kept in touch. Well, unfortunately, they all passed away. Only my friend Esther's daughter, I talked to her the other day. She looked just like her mother, and we still keep in touch because that's so important. Until 1994, I never talked about it, publicly.
Thank you. And do you know if this is available anywhere, or was it just something that your family has a copy of?
I think that Yale University, probably I had to sign the release that they could show that tape, and that I guess if they go to YouTube, probably. And if I want to mention, when I talked about when I went with my bicycle and I saw the Nazis, when I made the tape in 1994, I couldn't understand why my parents let me go. I had to wear the yellow star. So one of the girls, she was 10 years old there. She was still alive. Her name was Lucille. I called her up. I said, could you explain to me, Lucille, why my parents would let me go with the bicycle, with the yellow star? And she said to me, you don't remember. She had a sister in the city that my grandmother lived, and her niece was spending the first 2 days Passover. So the three of us were going. And because she was 10 years old, and my parents let me go with her. So I didn't go alone, because after I made the trip, I couldn't understand. I made that trip many a time, but now I had to wear a yellow star, so it was more, difficult. And also she was telling me we had to go to the mayor's office to get some documents who we were when we traveled.
Thank you so much. What do you think is an important life lesson that we can take as we still navigate this pandemic and its hardships? What's a good lesson that you can share with everybody about how to cope with this?
To never give up hope. And after they find a cure for this, I think it's going to be like, I remember after World War II, everybody was just so thankful that it was over, and enjoyed life more and appreciated things. Sometimes we take things for granted, but you have to remember. And any of us that live in this country, you have to be thankful, because anything that you want to accomplish, you could. And we have to appreciate and love this country, and we have to say God bless America many times.
Let's see. We thank you again so much. I think as a last question here, what made you start sharing your story once you came to Los Angeles?
My daughter-in-law Laura told me about that. About first, I went to a museum of tolerance, and I told my story, and then I used to speak there every Wednesday and every Friday. And then my granddaughter got in touch with you, I think. And then I went to the Holocaust Museum. And when they told me how important it is, and I never wanted to scare children, so that's why I always told them how lucky they are, and they have to appreciate everything here. And then also parents have to be responsible, raise their children, tell them right from wrong.
Martha, I think this is a good concluding note. So again, I want to thank you so much for being with us this morning, now afternoon. And we have so many comments from people listening who were just so inspired by your positivity and by the way you share your story and everything about you and your personality. I not only want to wish you Shana Tova, but I just want to again say that before the pandemic started and we were all working from home, Martha was volunteering up to several times a week, not only for our organization, you know, several organizations in Los Angeles, I know in schools, had been requesting Martha to speak, and Martha has had such an impact on this community. So we thank you so much for everything you have done to make our community a better place by teaching these lessons to everyone.
I thank you, and I'm thankful for God that I'll be 94 in November, that I could still do something that's important. It's important for me, you know, because when you get old, you don't want to burden on anybody. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody that was listening.
Thank you very much.
And have a happy and a healthy year.
Thank you. And I also want to let you know that you had people who were watching your talk from all over California, the United States, India, and Germany. And it looks like most of your family is here. So thank you all for tuning in. I'd like to remind our audience that we do record our virtual talks, and you can find them on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. While the museum is currently closed, our staff is working remotely to provide regular programs like this. You can always find our event schedule on our website, on our Facebook page. Next Thursday, we have Joe Alexander speaking. We have survivors speak every Thursday at 11 o'clock. On behalf of the museum, Shana Tova, and we wish everyone a happy, healthy, and peaceful year ahead. Thank you so much, Martha.
Thank you. And I say shalom because that's the best greeting. Shalom means peace.
Shalom.
Thank you so much.
Good Yontif, and we wish you a happy holiday with.
Bye.